Welcome to Allegedly Does Not Replicate, a podcast by the Institute for Replication, where we put research to the test again. In this episode, we'll introduce you to our chair, Abel Brodeur, and together we'll pull back the curtains to show you what the Institute is all about. Hello, everyone. My name is Juan Pablo. I'm your host here at the Allegedly Does Not Reproduce podcast. It's a new initiative by us at the Institute for Replication. And I'm happily introducing our chair, Abel Brodeur. So, Abel, say hi to everyone and tell everyone a bit about what we're doing here.
Yeah, hey, thanks. This is great. And we're really happy to start this podcast. And I hope this is going to be an interesting venue for people to listen about our activities. But I think also in general to get the behind the scene. There's a lot of things that are happening that are not necessarily public, be it relationship or communication with the authors, with the replicators, what's going on with the editors, how we're thinking also about like how the work that we're doing at IFR can actually change norms in the way that hopefully science is being done. So we're hoping to do that, but we're also hoping to have guests, weekly guests that can, make for interesting conversations. So be it about pre-analysis plan or pre-registration or p-hacking or mass reproducibility. And I think, this is something we talk quite a bit about, but we want this podcast to be more than just about, economics, political science. We want it to be quite broad and to talk about psychology, public health, and many other disciplines that we are currently working on or are going to be soon reproducing and replicating.
Fair enough. I think this podcast came as a natural thing after all our conversations that we had, not only after the games, but among ourselves as well. It's so interesting to notice how replication or the working paper series seems so serious, but once you get into talking with people, it rapidly becomes such a nice environment. And yeah, I think one of the main goals of the podcast as well is bringing people towards replication and trying to shed some light on the behind the scenes and show that we're not trying to get people and trying to destroy their papers and their work. Probably the contrary. We're very happy to help out people and just advance what we think is good. So yeah, our first episode, we wanted to tell you a bit of behind the scenes of our latest game. So Abel, would you like to tell people which was our latest game and how did it go?
Yeah, so both of us attended it. So this was sponsored by the European Economic Association and the Econometric Society. This was in Rotterdam. And I really like when we do games before conferences. I think it's nice because you can stick around for the conference, but also it's really nice to see people who are attending the conference who might not necessarily be interested in reproductions or replications, but are just thinking, there's a hackathon the day before. It could be interesting. I'm going to meet people and so on. This was nice, and it's great when I can attend or you can, and in this case, we both did. Many of the events are also organized and attended by Derek Mikola. I'm sure we're going to have him on the podcast a lot, so you're going to hear from him. But it was great because, and it goes a bit back to what you just said. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, and I really like the conversations that we had in Rotterdam, just the two of us, or then, drinks with people or during the event. And to me, a lot of people don't know this, but the Institute has been around for only 2 years, but you just started a couple of months ago. And when I talk to you, I'm always surprised by some of your reactions, because for me, I've been working on p-hacking, publication bias, and all that stuff since 2012. I'm like a dinosaur at this point. But when I talk to you and I tell you anecdotes about there was this reproduction, we submitted to a journal, the editor did this or whatever, and so on, you're so surprised and sort of shocked. And to me, it's it's a Tuesday. You know what I mean? Over the past 7 days, there's been so many communications, for instance, with two set of team of replicators who are somewhat upset about the decision that has been made by editors and the relationship with the original authors and so on. And I'm so into it that there's a point where when I tell anecdotes to people, participants at the games or you and so on, I'm always genuinely shocked by the reaction, because to me, it's happens all the time, and for you it's somewhat different. You know what I mean? It's
For
a different
sure.
perception.
For sure. I've been here in the Institute almost 5 months now. I came straight out of my PhD, and something that really shocked me and surprised me is how wild it is out there. because sometimes you just take a paper for granted, and you just read through the conclusions or through the methodology, and of course you assume that it's well done, it has been peer reviewed, and it's all sound. But as soon as a team of replicators get this paper and start digging into the replication package, sometimes what they found is wild. And I don't want to say that every paper is like that. Not at all. Not at all. It's a mixed bag. Whenever we go into a game, there's, I would say 80% of the papers are good. There's always one that is outstanding, in which the authors did an amazing job at documenting everything, be like lending the data for replicators. Is just outstanding. But though that 10% that is missing, there's always something going on. So I think we have a couple stories which Abel is going to tell you all about. But I just wanted to say that my first impression when I got into the institute was exactly that. Just sheer disbelief of the stuff, of the kind of stuff that not only we found during the games, but the anecdotes that Abel has. And I think,
wait, so I mean, let's take a step back. I
okay,
think it's great that you mentioned like most of the packages, most of the things that we look at, then that replicators and researchers are rerunning the codes and looking at everything. And it's great. And things are robust, things are really well done. And I think to me, what's funny is when people register to the event, any of the events, like this year we have like over 25. To me, it's a lottery. Like when they choose a paper, I have no idea whether it's going to be robust or not, whether their codes are going to be messy or not, or it's so hard to predict. But as you mentioned, and I think it's fascinating just to see teams. So teams of like 3, 5 sitting, and they're working all day long and they all work on a different paper. We know, and we talked about this because we've done so many events. We know there's one team that are going to find that it's a full mess. Not necessarily it's not robust, not necessarily it's full of coding errors, but like there's no data dictionary, or the code just nothing runs. There's missing files. The README is basically like it's bare bones. There's nothing there. And
no
the team is
labels.
just struggling like crazy all day long to try to just run the main regression. So you get a
Yes.
team like this. It just happens. And then you have the
Yes.
other team where any robustness checks that they do, it's gone. Results are gone, or there's major coding errors. And we can give examples. I'll give plenty. I mean, I could go on for hours, and I think that's why we're starting a podcast. But it's a lottery. And I think most teams actually find that, results are robust, everything is great. And, people could ask, like, how much can you do in a day? I think you can do a lot. Like, you're a team of 4 or 5. This is a paper in your field. You're not like undergraduate students. You're actually PhD students, postdocs, and faculty, or researchers like at a World Bank or whatever. And having like 4 or 5 pairs of eyes on one paper all day long, and you ran the codes in advance, and you keep working after the event on this, and you're all trying different robustness checks, or taking the codes and bringing it to state, or vice versa, or whatever, recoding blindly how you would have personally coded every variable and so on. Like, teams do a lot. It's insane. But it's so interesting to see that most teams find that everything is great. But of course, once in a while, it's like, and the once in a while is pretty much at every event. It's like, we're in shaky grounds here at best. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
No, that's great. And that's a very important point, because sometimes people think that reproduction of replication are being done by undergrads, and it's not the case at all. Like, are people that are experts in their fields that self-select into the field, not self-select into the paper, because we don't do that, but they self-select into the field. Yeah. So, for example, I do crime, and I will be self-selected into a crime paper. Once you're into this field for a couple of years, you're pretty good at picking up stuff pretty much right away. So, for example, if someone is using the global terrorism database and they're including 1993, you would immediately jump at that, because it's something that people are aware of, So
are they like, what's going on 1993? I know that because I use the data set, but
they lost the box, like the actual box, right? They were carrying it from one place to another, and
I think it's trained, right?
I think it did. I got this story from my advisor. He told me, like, at some point that they lost part of the GTDD, but you were the one who told me that they actually lost the box, like the physical box.
Yeah, I think it's a physical box. Anyway, it's like, it's a data set that a lot of people use. And I remember, like, we had a team of replicators, and they, of course, the first thing that they look at is, this is a GTD, so for sure, like 1993 is not
It's been
included. But the fact it's not
exactly.
included doesn't mean that there's no terror attacks. It means we don't have data. But the original authors were actually assuming that there was no terror attack, so a bunch of zeros. And we had the same thing in a recent paper published in Nature Human Behavior, where it was a different terrorism data set for whatever reason. It's again terrorism. But the original authors again assume like, well, they didn't join yet the European Union, so they're not in the data set, so there's no terror attack. Like, no, the data set is anyway. So stuff like this happens quite a lot.
For sure, for sure. And not only has to do with the data, but also with some coding decisions that sometimes happen. For example, can you tell the story about the many spellings of Albuquerque? That one really cracks me up.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we're gonna say is in the podcast, the point is not really to point out like specific authors or papers or anything like this. And we're never gonna mention like, for instance, names of editors and things like this. We're gonna explain the situation. We're gonna keep it vague enough because this is not like public information. We get to see like, because the referees, not the referees, but the replicators share information with us and so on. So we pretty much get to see like all these decisions that are made on comments at IFR, but there's coding errors in pretty much everybody's work. It's just a question of how much you dig and how much effort do you make at finding them. But some of the coding errors are just more important than others, and sometimes the work might be done by research assistants. You see the name of the research assistant. This happens a lot in the replication package. You see that it's even the data and codes are hosted on the GitHub page of the research assistant, and they're not an author of the paper, which is like a bit wild if you want my opinion, but we see this all the time. But anyway, we had this event in I think it was here in Ottawa. We had this replication games, and this team basically, it was a team of 5, a prof, I think 3 PhD students, I think 1 master student. But anyway, basically what they uncovered was that there was a problem with the data set. Basically, one of the key variable, which is the name of the city, was not cleaned. So what you end up with is the city of St. Louis being spelled ST dot or ST space or STL, etc., without a space. Anyway, so there's like many different ways that you can spell Albuquerque or St. Louis or whatever. But it's important because there are fixed effects. So there were way too many fixed effects in the analysis because they're absorbed, so you don't actually see it when you run the regression in Stata. But of course, they're actually included. So anyway, the team of replicators uncovered this, and the discussion paper is available in the IFR DP series for people interested in seeing this, and the authors responded. And I think now the comment is revised and resubmit at JPE, a Journal of Political Economy. Basically, what happened is the team of replicators uncovered this within like maybe an hour at the beginning of the event, or 2 hours. So during the event, yourself or myself or Derek, we walk around, we go from team to team. Sometimes they're all in the same room, sometimes they're in different rooms. So you end up walking a lot during these events, which is nice actually. But anyway, you sit with the team and then you're just like, hey, what's going on? What's your plan for today? And so on, etc. So the first meeting is more like trying to figure out like, what are you going to do during the day? The second time you talk to each team is like, hey, so what's going on? Like, did you manage to do what you wanted to do? Do you find any problems? Like, and then you try to provide support. And once in a while, you have teams like this that are like, well, I think they made this coding error, right? And this coding error like affects like the fixed effects, and the fixed effects are in the regression. So then it impacts pretty much everything. I mean, oh wow, so when you fix this, like what happens? And they're like, well, we cannot fix this. This is like an insane amount of cleaning that needs to be done. And then they try to use ChatGPT to clean and during the day, but it was too messy. So they ended up working for weeks and weeks afterward, trying to clean this. And it was a lot of work. But this is one example. There's tons of other examples like this. And it just happens. Like sometimes it's problem with merging. Sometimes it's the problem with merging, the most famous case that we had. So at one point, so the first event we ever had, the first replication game were in Oslo in Norway. And basically
tell the story about how you came up with the games.
That's a good question. So I got invited for a seminar, and the seminar was on Wednesday. And then on Friday, I had another seminar in Oslo at different university. And I just asked, like, so what do I do on Thursday? And, there was a Vikings museum I was into, and I was thinking of, like, I could do this or that. But then I just pitched the idea, like, hey, we could do maybe a hackathon. And then, the local organizer was like, yeah, sure, this could be a great idea. And we ended up doing that. And we posted just on social media, hey, we're doing this hackathon. We're going to replicate a bunch of papers. It's in Oslo. The date is like in October. Feel free to come. And then within like really fast, couple of days, we just get like, I don't know, 70 people to register to the event. Wow. And I checked the affiliations from like all over Europe, from like Ireland, Germany, and so on. And it was like, all right, we better close registration because we have no money. This is at a point in time where I4R, we had no funding, nothing.
I4R was you.
Well, no, I would never say this. There was tons of people like Ted Miguel, Anna Dreber, Fernando Cesar Guardia were always like co-director from the beginning. Like we had support from tons of people. We had the board, but anyway, like our first, I think 13 grant applications were rejected. We can come back to this later on. No, that's not the case. But anyway, so we get like 70 people to register to an event, which I just made up. I have no idea what I'm doing. And so we close registration. And then I'm like, okay, what do we do with these people? And I expected like 5 people to show up, a couple of people like in Oslo, the person who invited me, so on. And anyway, so all these people show up, and it's great. So then we, I just came up with like this idea that, we need to build teams and you need to be assigned papers and so on and so on. It's not that complicated, but anyway. So then the event starts and, at lunchtime, we need to go to the cafeteria because we have no funding and so on. And at the end, I think I paid for the drinks, but like for what, we didn't have much. And then I realized that the person who organized was actually paying for the rooms. And I felt so bad. And I was like, oh my goodness, you should have told me, but he uses funding. Anyway, I'll talk more about this later on, but he's on the team, as you can imagine. And the first paper that I ever assigned to someone was to his team. So when I say assign, we usually offer like 5 options to each team. So if you're doing crime economics, let's say, or health economics, or American politics, or psychology, whatever, depending on your subfield, you're going to be in a team of 3-5 people that are interested in that topic. Then we offer you a couple of weeks before the event, a couple of studies, let's say 5, that are like in crime, and you choose one. So anyway, so his team end up choosing a paper. And I'm like, all right, fair enough, no problem. Then each paper is assigned, each team has a paper. But then the event starts. I want to start the event, and I don't really know what to say to start the event. So I'm just like, well, thanks for being here. I say a couple of things. I have a few slides. Then the day before at the hotel, I'm like, oh, I could talk about like the Olympic Games. Don't know why I'm going to do that, but I'm going to do that because we call this replication games. I don't know why I'm doing this. It's more reproducibility. It has nothing to do with games. There's no competition, but whatever. So I start talking about like the Oslo Games, no idea why. And then the next slide, I put the national anthem of Norway. And of course, nobody in the room, maybe 70 people, don't want to sing the national anthem. So then I was like, whatever, it makes no sense. So we skipped that part, and then we just start the event. And then each team like has a different room and so on, and they start working, and I just feel like this is amazing. Like it's great. And it's so nice to see people just like sitting, working as teams and so on, just gives you tons of energy. It's super nice. Everything is positive and people are super into it. And so anyway, that day I go talk to him and his team, and I'm like, so how's it going? This is a great event. This is amazing. And like, thank you so much for like organizing this and everything. And then he's like, well, we split our team into 2. There's one team that works on the first part of the paper, and there's a part of our team that works on the second part. I'm like, oh, okay, how's it going for your part, the second part, the mechanism? He's like, well, not so good. There seems to be like many duplicates and things like this. So I'm like, okay, well, it happens or whatever. Then I come back like an hour later, and he's like, well, there's even more duplicates. And like now maybe it's like 20% of the sample. I was like, okay, well, whatever. Then I go talk to each team and so on, and the other teams are doing great. Things are robust or whatever. Another team, maybe it's not, but things are going good. But each time I come back to him and he's part of his team,
it was getting worse and worse.
It gets worse and worse. And at the end, it was like 75% of the observations were duplicates. Everybody is like 62 years old, the same, like it's the same row basically.
Wow.
And I think it's because of a merge problem and whatever. But you just open like the data editor and you just see it. Everybody's like 62, living in the same village, doing the same things.
Yeah, the classic many to many.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like that's one way to put it. But anyways, without going into the details of like, who are the replicators and so on and so on. I think to me, at least my initial reaction is, oh, wow, like, why did I just create this? Like the first paper I ever assigned to someone has so many duplicates and so many, like, anyway, it's a coding error. I was sincerely hoping that no other paper that day had any problems. And at that time, I was thinking maybe we should just stop this because it was just a sign. Like if it's the first paper
The first
we
ever.
ever do at one of the events and it's like that, I just don't know like if like I want to do that. Like it just anyway, it felt too much that day. It was like unbearable to me at least. And I don't know for the team. And there are things I cannot say, and that's why I'm being vague and so on about the team of replicators. Again, people can look at this discussion paper and so on, and maybe at one point we can have them on the podcast, some of them anyway. But it was quite something. And things like this don't necessarily happen at each event where there's one paper with like coding errors like this. And that's not necessarily the point of these events. Like most people like spend time on robustness checks and so on. But I guess, the point is there are things that as a referee you cannot pick up. There's
for sure. And that was something that I wanted to bring up because people might have the impression that our objective is to destroy papers as much as we can. And that's not at all what we do. In fact, when a paper comes like that, it's kind of a mess because we cannot compare our robustness that we typically do to the point estimates that the original authors are publishing. So it doesn't even make it to our meta database. So in a sense, it's kind of a hassle for the replicator team that unveils those kind of problems because it's more work for them. And at the end of the day, they end up with the exact same reward that they would have ended if they got a paper that reproduces exactly. Because think about it this way, or at least I think about it this way. Most of the people that come into the games, they have two objectives. The first one is, of course, have a good time and meet people and do a bit of networking. And the second one is to become a co-author of the meta paper. And the easiest way of becoming a co-author of the meta paper is to get a perfectly reproducing paper. You just go there, you just click on the run button, and everything runs smoothly. And that's the best case scenario for people. So when they find one of those papers with a bunch of problems, funny enough, some of the reactions that we get from people is God.
And like the local organizer, Andreas Kotsadam, like I can say his name, I cannot say the names of everybody on his team, but was great about it. And of course, that was not the objective. And he, they didn't necessarily want to uncover this. I think nobody that day thought that anyone could uncover something like this because it's so in your face. Like as a replicator, you just open the data set and it's just like, you see it right away. And their comment, people can read it. So the journal, like, I think they did an amazing job. And Journal of Political Economy, like, so far has dealt with, I think, 4 or 5 of comments that we've submitted, that replicators have submitted. And that one, they were super fast. They published it really fast. The original authors released, a response and acknowledged the problem and so on. So I think this was dealt with like professionally by the original author, by the replicators, and by the editor who was in charge of this, and it was really fast. But I think, as a replicator, you don't necessarily want that to happen, to be honest. This is not the package or paper that you want. And you go to these events, as you said, I think just like, it's great networking. You learn a lot. And I think that's like, imagine being a PhD student. I'm getting old, but like back in 2012, like you couldn't get anybody's code. It would just be impossible. Like there was only a couple of researchers in my field who would actually share codes on their website. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. But other than that, you couldn't get anybody's code. So I think that's quite important because you had to learn how to code from scratch. And I'm still terrible to this day, probably coding. But you had to learn by yourself. And the idea just to sit with other PhD students and faculty or
Yeah,
postdocs
senior professor as well, which is
for a
a rare
day
opportunity.
and
Exactly.
seeing how they're thinking about robustness checks, how they're thinking
Exactly.
about like the package, how to run codes, and having different ideas and brainstorm for the full day. And even before by emails, you choose the paper, you exchange ideas, you have a game plan. And then later on, writing a report about that is insane when you think about it. That's never something that most people would do. I never actually sat for a full day with a co-author coding. When I have a co-author coming to Ottawa for like, a seminar or something, we go for dinner, we talk about the paper, of course, but we never actually sit and actually do the work. And
It's
there
such a
you
fun
do it, and it's
experience.
not your paper. So it's a great experience.
Yes, not only for PhD students, because they get to sit down often with senior professors and learn from them, which is a rare experience on its own, but also for senior professors, some of the feedback that we get from them is like, I haven't coded that much in years. So it's funny
There's
because
trust.
exactly, they learn a lot. They learn a lot of new techniques, a lot of new tools and stuff from PhD students, which is something that I would never have guessed. Like, but
But
they enjoy
sometimes
themselves.
we have, yeah, sorry for interrupting, but sometimes we have like more senior profs who say, well, I would attend, but I haven't coded in ages. And then I'm like, yeah, but
Mhm.
just come. Like, and we'll put you on a team with like PhD students and maybe postdocs or another like more junior faculty, and they'll do the coding. Like you
And they
can
will
help with the
happily do the
report.
coding.
Yeah, but you can help with the report, you can help with like thinking of robustness checks. And as a PhD student, just having someone senior in your
Mhm.
field from a different university attending the event and being on the team with that person is huge. Like people contribute in different ways. And
It's a win-win scenario.
yes, I think so. And I
For sure.
always encourage like people who are not good at coding or more senior to come because you see things differently.
For
Now,
sure.
like now when I look at a paper, I look very differently at papers and codes and so on in comparison to the way I was like 10, 15 years ago. It's just different. And now, like if I would go at one of these events and I would actually be sitting and doing it, which actually sometimes I end up doing because there's teammates that are
Mhm.
missing or whatever, like I do it completely different. And I cannot help like necessarily like coding as fast as other people. Like, oh, they're taking the codes and are bringing it to Python or whatever. Like, I cannot do
Yeah.
this as fast as most PhD students. It's just like it's a
Yeah,
skill
it's
that but you can contribute in different ways.
for sure. But now that you have been doing it for a while, do you think there's like telltale signs of papers that are gonna be reproducing perfectly and papers that are gonna struggle?
It's tough. Like, I don't really have a good sense of like ex ante which paper is going to reproduce or not. The quality of the codes, I don't. Coding are incredibly hard to predict. Incredibly hard, in my opinion. Whether results are robust or not, I think if you read the abstract and the introduction and you just use your like, I don't know if I buy this story or not. Maybe a bit
Mhm.
of that if it's in your field. So there's a smell test, I guess. But I think just predicting which paper is going to be robust or reproducible, replicable using new data is incredibly hard. And people have been trying, like Center for Open Science and many others have tried to do
Mhm.
this with AI. And yeah, they're better than like a coin toss. But let's not fool ourselves. They're not doing really good. AI is not doing that good because predictors are really hard to get. And I think, that to some extent that's a future. And I think we're gonna have episodes on this later on with like people doing AI and people from open science for sure. But I think what you need to think of is if you can predict which paper is going to be replicable using new data or robust with AI or with like good predictors, it changes the game. It completely changes which paper we should trust, which paper we should not trust. It could help completely the way that editors make decisions, that sort of thing. Now you cannot fully like, only use that information. Like, there needs to be
Mhm.
reference process and so on, but it would completely change the way that we think about papers, about like which one has external validity, which one has internal, and things like this. So this is
I asked because something we had a report coming recently about a paper that I cite multiple times in my own job market paper. And for me, that one paper was kind of a hero paper of mine. And when you read it, you don't get a sense of if there's a problem or not. And it's very difficult because you never have access to the actual, not only the editor, no, the referees and the reader, they don't get access to the data. So it's very difficult for you to realize that there's something wrong with it. But as soon as a replicator gets deep into it, the problems become very apparent. So I remember you telling me that a group of replicators came up with a very long report of this paper, and I was very surprised because this paper has become quite influential within my field, and it's very difficult to tell if a paper is going to reproduce or not.
That's fair.
It's super hard.
And like I know which report you're talking about. Like we have hundreds, but I know exactly the one you're talking about. It's not public yet, so we're not going to comment on this. The original authors have responded. The comment is being handled at a journal, let's say a top journal in social sciences. But it's hard to predict. It's going to be hard to predict. I think there are things that we're learning over time as well. That if the paper is published a few years ago versus now, like, the difference in literature has changed so much. I think there are things that people suspect sometimes, but there hasn't necessarily been a paper that deals comprehensively about like these different problems and so on. It's hard to predict. And I think even if you could predict whether it's robust or not, you're never going to be able, I think, to predict with like high accuracy on like coding errors. That's just not something that is easy to predict. I think we've seen it. We've seen it, and even if you could, I think you would screw up because you don't know who coded. And that's something that I've seen so many replication packages, hundreds. There's so many that it's obvious that this was not coded by the original authors. This was coded by research assistants. So even if you would have good predictors of here's a paper and we think that there's coding errors in that specific paper, because of characteristics of the paper, characteristics of the authors, and so on. Yeah, but you don't have the characteristics of the RA. You just don't. And that's problematic. And the other thing, I think people don't realize it, and I think maybe that's why we're doing the podcast like this, but often when we have a team of replicators that uncover problems, coding errors, and so on, and they send a report, let's say 20, 30, 40, 50 pages to the original authors, of course, we never release this publicly until the original authors have a chance to respond, unless it's been like 6-9 months and the original authors are clearly not interested in responding. The original authors usually ask for the codes of the replicators. I mean, you're laughing, but the reality is original authors sometimes are very busy. Sometimes they don't know how to code this. It's a research assistant who coded this. The research
already left.
Is at a different institution outside of academia. They need to find a new research assistant. The coding is not really clear. Their package is not necessarily really clear. They cannot really understand how everything was coded. So they need the support of the replicators, right? They need the intellectual property of the replicators to help them figuring out the coding error, how important the coding error is, and then they can actually write a response. So this happens quite a lot. I would argue like maybe most of the time when there's a major coding error. Not always, but it does happen. It does happen. And the replicators, and we'll come back to this, and to me, this is like the most important topic, I guess, to me right now is the replicator who, or a team who uncovered coding errors, if they submit a comment to a journal, and this is a coding error that leads to a corrigendum or a response or something like this official by the original authors, should get a publication, a comment. It can be short, it can be 1 page or something, but this is intellectual property most of the time, and often the replicators have actually provided even codes to clean the coding errors that the original authors could not have even like wrote themselves, or at least in a short and timely manner. So there comes a point where we see so many, and it's not a journal, and we're never going to name on the podcast like names of editors, because it's a problem really at large.
And not only in economics.
No, definitely not. Political science, demography, public health, name it. Like, definitely not only economics. But you have comments being submitted to journals. The editors don't have the guidelines, don't have the tools, don't know how to handle comments. Will often submit the comment only to, as a referee, only to the original authors. Will not ask for other referees, which right away to me it's a red flag. Like that just doesn't make any sense. But anyway, like the original authors, I don't blame them, will write probably that they find when they play with the data and so on, that their story still robust and that the coding error doesn't matter too much. I've never actually seen an original author saying, oh yeah, actually there's been a coding error. It changes the conclusion of the paper, even though most of the time that's what the replicators say. So anyway, you need like external reviewers to actually review this, who will be able to like get a better sense of, how big this coding error is and so on. And then the editors can decide like, is this a big
Yes.
deal or not? How should the response look like? But to me, there needs to be a reward for the replicators. And I would say over the past 6 months, we've had tons of cases where the comment is just rejected and the authors are asked to release a short corrigendum saying there's a few coding errors, but that it doesn't matter, basically.
For sure. I wanted to expand on that a bit, because for us, it's clear that the comments have intrinsic value of their own and they should be valued and shared by the community. But for some people, since they have no quote unquote original ideas, they are just correcting or expanding on someone else's idea, they shouldn't have the same value. And I would like to push on that a bit, because sometimes, as you said before, correcting or disputing a claim that has been published in a top journal is perhaps more important than expanding our knowledge into a not so famous journal, right? Sometimes those big papers, they influence not only policy, but they also influence future research. So having the knowledge that perhaps there's something wrong or something that's misleading about those papers is huge. The referee, not the referees, the replicators should have a reward, because sometimes these packages start as a 1 day thing, but once they find like a big mistake or a big coding error, they could go on for weeks, and this could end up being like a lot of work for them. So it's not like they just turn up a day, run a couple of regressions, and they just send a comment to the journal. No, sometimes it's months worth of work, or years.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misconception. Like, I guess here we're not talking about like there's a minor coding error, doesn't change anything, or there's a typo, or like we're not talking about like small correction like this. I think we're talking about, there's a coding error or multiple coding errors. There's, and potentially the results are not robust, or you criticize the identification strategy or the methods used and so on. Like we're talking about like comments that are like 15, 20, 30, 50, 70 pages long, right? So we're talking about this right now that are rejected, and then the authors just release a short corrigendum. And again, I don't have a problem with the authors releasing this or whatever. They're being told what to do by the editor. So at the end of the day, to me, it's the editor's like responsibility. But I think, as you've mentioned, it's an insane amount of work sometimes. Like there's a comment right now that is revise and resubmit at like a top journal where the replicators uncovered coding errors, contacted the authors. The authors needed the codes of the replicators because they couldn't fix anything. The replicators spent months cleaning the data and fixing the coding error and all the problems into the that they have uncovered. They wrote a lengthy report. They interacted with the authors a lot. The authors never wrote a response to them. We're waiting for months and months and months. The replicators sent a comment to the journal. Most of the times rejected. In that case, it was not. It's R&R. There's 4 referees that ask for an insane amount of things, rewriting more analysis, showing more tables, showing all the tables that could be impacted by these coding errors. The editor asked for things to be changed and so on. It goes through multiple rounds. And then you're like 2 years later. Like, I don't make stuff like this. We have plenty of cases like this. Is it as much work as actually publishing the original study? Sometimes, yes. Is it as much innovation? Well, you would say no, and I would agree most of the time, but actually many of the comments in the social sciences that are rejected by the editors is because they argue that there's no new contribution or new methodology. So the editors say, we cannot publish this comment because, yes, there are coding errors and so on, but you don't make a contribution to the literature. So the bar actually is quite high for most journals. And I saw an email from like an editor at the top journal of a top association yesterday, basically saying this: the comment is interesting, points problems, points plenty of things, but does not actually make a methodological contribution to the literature. So I've seen many comments being published, even one that was criticizing my work, that ended up being published after the replicators needed to sort of add a contribution to the
Mhm.
literature. And to me, like, this is a bit crazy.
Yeah,
Like,
it is.
there's something like that just doesn't add up here. And we'll talk about this at length, like with way more examples and things like
For
this, but
sure.
it happens a lot. And this is why
Yes.
we don't want to name editors. We don't want to talk about specific journal, because I can think of, like, just over the past couple of months, of the stories I've heard, it's at least like maybe 20, 30 editors in, like, at maybe 10 journals. So there's a point where you're just like, no, this is just, there's no norms, there's no guidelines. Many editors don't want to publish this. Why? Why would you want to publish a comment? It's your journal. It's basically admitting that your journal published a paper that has problems and that maybe you should not have published that paper. In addition, you're not going to please the original authors for two reasons. First, because you publish a comment, but second, because why them?
Mhm.
Why do you publish that comment and not all the other comments? Why did they receive a comment and not hundreds of other authors who publish in that journal? Now you could say, well, because there's a coding error. Yeah, but maybe there's coding errors in tons of other
Yeah.
papers.
People feel
Maybe-
one of the things about the institute and replication in general is that it's such a novel thing for social sciences to be publishing replications in like we are. This is very common on other sciences. For example, in medical science, comments are published all the time, even retractions. Hard sciences as well. Chemistry is one in which comments and retractions are published all the time. The thing is, for us in economics and political science and social sciences in general, this is such a new process that is not only new for us within the institute, but also new for the editors, new for the original authors, new for the replicators. So oftentimes what happens is that editors are making decisions on the fly, and not necessarily ill-intended. They just want the best for their journals, the best for the replicators, and the best for the original authors. But it's hard to make a decision and not hurt sensibilities. But I think as this progresses, and I think it's kind of the spirit of the institute in a sense, is to move us towards an equilibrium in which people expect their work to be reproducible in order for us to avoid sending comments in the future. I think that's the ultimate goal. Not target specific people, but shift the equilibrium towards people expecting their work to be replicated. Especially nowadays that most empirical work is based off data and regressions and empirical techniques that can be reproduced and can be challenged and are going to be evolving over time. So I think it's just a new norm in a sense, and we have to get used to it. I don't know if you agree with that, but I think that's the way I kind of see it.
No, I agree. And I think, if you see, there were previous efforts, and there's still other efforts, to try to reproduce or replicate like a couple of studies in some journals or in some discipline or subfield. I think the problem is you get right away to the question of why that paper? And the original authors will somewhat feel targeted, and I think rightfully so. It's like, why me? And then you could say, well, we use this criteria, like number of citations, number of this, and then it becomes more formal, which you should do. But I think it doesn't solve the question of, sure, but like you're writing comment about my paper and not about all these other papers. And you just decided that you would focus on my specific paper. So this thing of targeting to me was crucial. Like it's one of the first things I was thinking like before starting the Institute is, how do you get rid of that? And to me, it's mass reproduction and replication. You have to do it at a mass scale. And when I email an author, which I do all the time, multiple times every day, but it's like, here's a report. We mass reproduce many, many journals. And if the authors, often I jump on a Zoom call talking to them, trying to explain what we're doing and so on, or back and forth by emails. And often like we get responses like, well, why did you choose my paper? Or thank you for choosing my paper. Like most of the emails that I send are actually positive, saying everything's robust or runs or reproducible, etc. But they thank us for choosing the paper. And then I said, no, don't thank.
We do it for everyone.
We didn't choose the paper. We chose the journal and the year. So we only do recent years and we chose the journal. So you publish in the journal. Congratulations. That's a great publication. And that's why we reproduce it.
I think that has become quite a good thing. Nowadays, if you publish in a top 5, in recent years, is almost guaranteed that we're going to reproduce your paper at some point.
Yeah, so top 5 in economics. So we use top 5 for economics. Political science would be top 4. So anyway, so I think, you know,
Yeah.
I would agree that if you publish in a top journal, especially in economics, the discipline that we focus the most, but also I think we're trying to do as much as possible in political science. Like the likelihood that we will reproduce your paper and have someone looking at it is quite high. And that's the idea. Is it 100%? No, I mean, there's tons of data we cannot buy. There's tons of data we cannot access. We're trying to do that, and we'll talk about this. So we have an event in a few weeks where we're going to have teams of replicators working on sensitive data that is being used in Sweden. So we're trying to get to that, but publicly available data, the idea is exactly this. Like, you know in advance that the likelihood that you receive an email at one point from me, the Institute, saying, here's a report that comments on your work, whether it's robust or not, whether there's coding errors, whether we can run your codes, whether they're clear or not, etc., is quite high. And the goal is that you're going to potentially change norms and behavior of people. So instead of having
sure.
one RA coding, maybe they're going to have two RAs, cross code or review coding. That leads to changes down the road. That's the idea.
I think that's the ultimate goal. Like to incite such a change that people are not rattled by the fact that people are reproducing their work, but expect it and take measures to avoid including major mistakes. Like you said, having multiple arrays code the same thing at the same time and arrive to the same conclusions. Take a look yourself, code a big part of it yourself. I think that's the good thing.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I think we're out of time. Almost
exactly.
1 hour of podcast. Like I knew we were gonna talk about a bunch, but not that much. I think it was a tremendous success. Hopefully, people like it and keep tuning in. So
And please give us ideas if there's any topics you want us to talk about. That would be fantastic. And I think just to finish, we hope to do a pod like after each event where we can sort of recap like what happened, what each team was working on, and so on. But the goal is to have like a guest, I guess, every week to bring the topic somewhere else and the conversation somewhere else.
For sure. And if you've been a subject of reproduction or replication, leave your comments and let us know what you think of us. If you don't like us, you can also tell that. But please, we try to be as helpful as we can, as respectful as we can. And if you want to be a part of the podcast and you're like an editor or something like that and you want to be hosted, please send us a DM. We will be more than happy to host you and have a conversation with you. I don't know. You have any last comments for people?
No, I think that's a wrap. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week.
We'll see you and listen to you next week.